Hi, I'm Harut Markarian, and this is Mobility and Inclusion, the show where we share the powerful stories of people with disabilities and daring entrepreneurs making waves in our world. From technological innovations to best practices in business, we'll learn what it really means to live in an inclusive and universally designed environment. Welcome to a new episode of Mobility and Inclusion. I am your host, Harut Markarian, and my special guest today is the impactful educator, Gary Rockis. Gary dedicated his 40-year career to helping students develop careers and technical skills and knowledge. He's the author of a number of articles for Technical Education magazine. Gary believes that the key to learning is using simple applications of science and technology. Because of that, hundreds of teachers have used his books to train thousands of students throughout the United States in the fundamentals of technology. Gary has been writing about the use of technology in homes since 1976. He believes that smart devices make your life better and that only you can choose the devices that best work for your situation and lifestyle. His latest book, Your Smart Home Voyage, takes you through a virtual home room by room with the idea of making your home safer, more energy efficient, comfortable, and convenient. And without further ado, Gary, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much. That was a lengthy and appreciative introduction. Thank you.
I hope I did you justice with that.
Well, I think you did a wonderful job.
All right, cool. So, you've been focusing on this technology since 1976. So, what made you really focus on this particular topic?
Well, I was very fortunate growing up in a town of 500 to have a science teacher who was really into the Sputnik and rocket thing. And he brought us a couple experimental rockets to class when I was in about fifth grade, and I just went wild. I just loved it. And I was able to pursue that. I met Werner von Braun. I got involved with rocket clubs. I launched rockets, and I was going to be an aeronautical engineer, but ended up going into the technology education space, and have just absolutely enjoyed it ever since.
That's awesome. It's one thing, actually, when we first met, one thing that really attracted me to you more is you said something along the lines of, being in technology and actually using technology or studying technology versus using technology is two different things, right? A lot of people study technology and study the sciences, but you find very rare people that can apply what they've studied. What's your experience with that?
Well, I'll tell you, I was my best student and my worst student in that in my industrial technology, I loved everything I did. But I was straight A's pretty much through every course except for two courses, electricity and electronics. And that's my specialty now. And what I found out back then is that my instructor, a good instructor, great guy, but he taught engineering. He taught how the device was to be constructed and designed. When I started teaching with the kids, they went, hey, I'm putting a Heath kit together back then. I'm doing this, I'm doing that. I'm going like, whoa, wait a minute. That's applications. That's fun. Now you can put technology behind it and you can explain Ohm's law and those kind of things when you're doing application. And then it was further reinforced several years ago. I had dinner with Bill Nye, the science guy, and over at Illinois State University after he did a spellbinding demonstration to 800 kids in an auditorium. And they were dead silent until they went, oh, and they saw this. And so I asked him afterwards, I said, Bill, how do you present? What's your technique? He said, well, I pretty much look for the third grade level and try to do applications. He said, but interestingly enough, about 80% of my audience are also adults who just want to understand what's going on. So I told him what I did, and my philosophy is I always taught to the C student, and I used applications and visualization to put them in a situation where they understood what they knew, and then I took them to where I want them to be. Yeah. And that has been very successful for me in all my writings. And So I've stuck with it.
Yeah, that resonates with me a lot because I was a professional basketball player in my past life. So at that time when I was going to school, I wasn't a very good student if you looked at my grades, right? But once that went out of sight, basketball was no longer a factor. And when I dove deeper into my educational career, I always found the best. I always got the best grades when I actually got involved in applying theoretical knowledge to applicable technology, right? Applying theory to action, to function, and then that was always I always understood better and I got better grades. So, and professors like you are not easy to find. Speaking from personal experience, there are only maybe 2 or 3 professors, and I went to school for a long period of time. I have a bachelor's and 2 masters, so I, I cannot thank you enough for the way you're teaching and you taught previously.
Well, I appreciate that. I do not consider myself to be a professor. I tell people I got a BS degree and I've used it very well.
Well, I mean, you don't. I guess educator would be a better maybe description for what you did, and I know you mentioned that in your biography, right?
And I think that's I'm a self-educator, and I like to be able to pass it on. And again, in simple terms, I don't know exactly when that came about, but I find that if you go and sit down, and a lot of times what I would do, I'd write things like my first book was on residential wiring when there wasn't anything out there that was really good. So I'd write, draw pictures, and I'd give it to a neighbor who knew nothing about it. And I did that with my students. I would put material, and even when I finished books, I would take them in and let them go through it because I wanted them to tell me what they didn't understand.
Yeah, yeah.
There's always a story. I know what I'm talking about, but if you don't understand it, and I don't know if this is technically correct, but I say it's like winking at a girl in the dark. It really doesn't matter,
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And that's something I struggled with earlier too, because I always, when I understood it, I could speak to it, but it's not necessary that other people also understood it. And we were doing this exercise in class one day, and I went up there and I thought I did a very good job in explaining this graph or chart, whatever I was talking about, I forgot. That was a long time ago. And then I turned to the class and they were all like had dead expression. I was like, I was really clear. How did you guys not get that, And to your point, you know what you're talking about and you understand it, but it's not necessary. That the important thing is for other people to understand what you're talking about. And that's a whole different game.
Yeah, and you also have to respect your class and the person that raises their hand. I remember at each grading period, I allowed them to grade me. The 2 things they can't use were swear words and no tests. But other than that, they were open. And one I thought was really unique. I had prepared all this material and said, when you're finished, have your superior check it off. Mm-hmm. And after the second semester, I had one kid wrote, well, I'm not sure you're my superior. And I thought, you know what? That's quite possible. So I changed it to supervisor. and it just made a little difference. And that kid was just tickled to death. Now he runs his own software company, awesome. So he probably was superior.
No, that's great. You're right. And you have to respect your audience. You have to respect your class, your student for sure. And there's a lot to be said about that. But as you know, I am the founder of a startup called Markbotics, and we focus on, providing additional level of independence through robotic technologies. And so mobility and inclusion, the podcast was created to add value through information to people's lives, right? Letting them live more independent at a higher quality of life. So, and when I saw your work throughout the years and then your book, I'm like, this is something that a lot of people with disabilities can benefit from. And I know you have some experience with working with people with disabilities. Why don't you tell us about that a little?
Well, there's been several situations. I think I mentioned to you when we were talking one other time that early on, because I did vocational schools and vocational education, I had to design a laboratory. It was a wood shop for the deaf.
Mm-hmm.
And what is notorious in a wood shop is to have a spinning blade that the only way you can really tell is not visually, is but audibly.
Yeah.
So if somebody walks up to a table saw and they inadvertently touch it, they're going to cut a finger off.
Mhm.
So I designed, this is before electronics was solid state, pneumatic timers that when the device was off, there was a green light. When they pushed the button, it was a red light. And then I timed each motor until the device actually stopped. So when they shut it off, it would coast to a stop and they would know it was okay. So I've always taken and looked at not only the technology for what's good, but what I did in my book, and I'm going to pitch that a little bit, but it's very difficult just reading something for a lot of people to comprehend it.
Mhm.
So what I did here is I took and I used a lot of animation, I used a lot of graphics, I used a lot of pinpoint and then focus. And to get people started and excited about the book, you're familiar with QR codes, right?
Of course.
And most people are when they go to a grocery store. It's zing, zing, zing. There's a lot of information being processed. So you can use your phone now. A lot of people don't know that to read those codes. So what I did is I had my publisher take the animation I did on a smart bedroom, a smart kitchen, a smart living room, and I put that animation behind the QR code. So in the first chapter or two, when I'm talking about a smart bedroom, I said, let's go take a tour. You can see it on my website, GaryRockis.com, not hard to figure out. And then you just go in and there you can click on a button. But when you have the book, you can put your QR code there. You can actually go in your bedroom and kind of look around and go, oh, I hadn't thought about that. Example being with a special population. Let's say your child is deaf or blind. We can use a combination of lights to signify, like a blue light would be an intruder, a red light would be a fire. We can use alarms. Those are kind of typical, but then we could tie it into a vibrating pillow so that if they're sound asleep, they're obviously not going to hear it, they're not going to see the light, but it's a vibrating pillow, wakes them up, they see the light, they know what to do. Very simple, but very effective, and it can save a life.
Absolutely. So you said something very, very important. Technology does not need to be complicated, right? There are
Right.
simple things that we can do that adds an exponential amount of importance in our lives. And that's something I try to convey to people, when we mention the word robotics, for example, because, since the company I have is robotics company, it's like robotics doesn't have to be something very complex. We can do very simple things that can be very effective to a lot of people. And that's something I resonated with when you were talking. And another thing you mentioned, so you mentioned vibrating pillows. Have you done any studies about, equipping these rooms and pillows and whatever other stuff that are in the bedroom? The studies between the technology that you put in that room and the health risks that may or may not be there. Are there any studies there?
Well, the only one I've done a little bit on, and again, it's still controversial. There's two areas where people are still kind of freaking out a little bit, and you have to base it on government information, which there already starts a little bit of concern. But it's the radiation from a cell phone
Mhm.
and that from a smart meter.
Yeah.
Now, I do point out what the quality of the output is, so to speak. And quite honestly, a lot of it is very, very low. And a lot depends on what you do with it. You know, for people who are right up to their ear, you're going to have the highest volume. I personally, most of the time, as long as the connection is good, I use speakerphone.
Yeah, yeah.
If it's bad, then I'll put it up there. And when you're in a home, if that meter is facing out, you got a brick wall, chances are those items are not going to affect you.
Mhm.
So again, I think before people judge something, they have to evaluate in context of where they're at and what's
Yeah.
going on. And
Absolutely.
that's true for technology. And one of the things that I do in the book is I try to bring, just like when you're talking about robotics, there's terms that people feel uncomfortable with. And I said the biggest word I think in my book is interoperability, which means that they can talk to each other. The other big word I know is delicatessen. And coming from a small town, I didn't know what that was until I was experiencing it a couple times. And now I have a pretty good idea what a delicatessen is. And if you read my book, you'll have a pretty good idea what interoperability is, because I use it and I show you that the device has to have the same language and it has to be on basically the same telephone line. So, you know, you do that with your cell phone. The computer does it internally, but you have to make your devices connect to each other.
Yeah.
So again, what the book does, it gives you a baseline, whether you're doing something for someone or you're trying to learn it yourself. You want to be able to talk intelligently to the people you're buying it from, the person who may be installing it. So, you know, get your vocabulary down. It's all pictures, animation, and a nice, the other thing I can tell you is 50% of the book is graphics or animation. So, and I tell my author or my publisher that it's a technical comic book, and then they cringe a little bit. So.
Yeah. No, but I love it. I cannot wait to, you know, as you know, I already bought the book. I think it's coming either today or tomorrow. So I can't wait to put it to use, you know, and it is something that my son would benefit from it a lot, you know. My son is granted he's still young, but you know, I would think 100% and believe this, that if I give it to him from a young age, then when he goes to college, he wouldn't have any problem grasping these theories.
Basic concepts.
Yeah, yeah.
It's the fundamental. If you go back to Bill Nye, he is showing you things that are aerodynamics. He's showing you things that are temperature related, but he's doing it in a way that, oh, that's neat. What does that mean? Well, it means that the goes around this way because of the way the airflow is. Mm-hmm. And now you go, oh, that was aerodynamics. Yeah. Looks to me like it was airflow, which it was. Yeah. But so again, that terminology is really important to get out of the way of you learning. Yeah. And so anytime I use a word that I don't think somebody would know, I define it immediately.
Yeah. No, that's very important. I'm glad you mentioned that. Terminology is very important, and a lot of the times these big words, quote unquote, big words, keeps people from really wanting to learn more about it, or scares them, right, and hinders them from moving forward.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the reason that is most of the technical writing is either done by an engineer who really isn't a technical writer, mm-hmm. at least not one for the most of the population, or it's the marketing department, which is trying to give you all kinds of ideas and things, and they don't necessarily, I won't say they don't tell the truth, but they exaggerate the potential and don't tell you some of the downsides or what the other products can do for you also. Yeah,
no, that's great. And, you know, even though I'm an engineer and I'm gonna, you know, it kind of hurt a little bit what you said. I'm just kidding. No, but no, you're right.
I'll hold it against you.
I agree with you. It's like, yeah, most engineers should not write. I completely agree with you.
They break things until it works, and I think that's fine.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the other thing that I saw on your webpage, it said you're also a storyteller, which is a very important thing when you're trying to communicate to somebody, right?
Yes.
So
And I was a history major before I was a technology major. And I loved history. And if you look at technology, it is a history lesson because I was born basically 1946. Mhm. And that was about the same year the transistor was born. So if I follow my career and my pathways, I can see how one built on the other, built on the other. Example being when CAD finally was introduced, it was able to make printed circuit boards that were smaller and more accurate, which allowed you to make better CAD systems that made the printed circuit boards better. And people learned and integrated this, and all of a sudden it starts snowballing.
yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. You're right. Like I've never looked at technology as being related to history. That's because maybe I hated history when I was in school. But now, looking back in the past 2-3 years, I'm researching history a lot, and I'm like, if I wasn't such a stubborn kid when I was going through school and I paid more attention to history, I would have probably not struggled as much in finding information right now. But let's go back to talking about vibrating pillow, which I loved. I mean, I know we were talking about, people with special needs, people with disabilities, that, there are things that they can do to, facilitate their lives. And, the vibrating pillow can even be used for people like you and I, right?
Sure.
Like deep sleepers. And it's a great way of alarming you of something that is happening in your house.
Correct.
Uh,
And you can take that too. I think one of the things people have a misinformation on is that, oh, I have to buy a system and it all, it's going to talk to me, it's going to do this, it's going to do that. Think about this. Most people have had a smart device for a long time. Well, actually, two of them. One is your garage door opener. It's based on an input,
Yep.
a signal, and an output.
Mhm.
Everything in a smart home is based on that process. The only thing that gets more difficult is the process. When they start inserting the computer, then there's programming involved. So when you say, Alexa, turn on my music, it has to be programmed to go to a music station and bring that on. But a lot of things you can do, for example, if you have a situation with your hands, waterless faucets don't have to be tied into a system.
Yeah.
You can have a leak detector by your hot water heater that I'll give you an alarm. You can have your sprinkler system outside that's automated. So look at simple things first that you can use. Now, if you think long-term, you're going to tie it into a system, then you have to be aware of where you're going with it. Now, the good news is there's talk that a lot of the players are going to get together. I think what happened was Alexa taught people a lesson that, okay, you can have a proprietary language, but Bezos didn't care about the language. What's he sell? He doesn't sell language, he sells products.
Yeah.
So anybody wants to use my language, here, take it. And now other people are realizing that they're getting left out. And so I think you're going to see a consolidation, just like you did in the power chords. For a while, you had 10 different power chords. Now there's a standard. It'll take a while, but it's moving in that direction.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious so you're talking about all this thing that is, really capturing data, right? What's your position on just surrendering a lot of your data to these devices? And of course, companies are capturing this data and sometimes using it against you, sometimes using it for you. It depends on how you look at it. But I'm curious in knowing what's your stance in that.
Be nice. Be a nice person.
That's really funny.
Well, I mean, it's a trade-off between my concern is not the companies, although there's a lot of debate on where we're at with Facebook and some of that, because it's awful personal.
Mm-hmm.
But on some of it, you have to decide, do you want the service that's provided by monitoring your equipment? Do you want weather that maybe alerts you when so, you have to know where you're at and how to get a hold of you. So I think, there's not a good way right now of determining that because people are circumventing it. They're doing this and that. Personally, I just try to keep my Facebook and other things within the real simple limits. I talk with my family. For example, we don't announce that we're on vacation. We talk about it after we come back. We don't, if we show the kids going to school, not necessarily tell where the school is. There's certain data that you just don't want to put out there.
Yeah.
And
I
so,
actually, I think that's a very good way of putting it. Be mindful of the information you're putting out there. That's what we're saying basically here, right?
right. But there's going to be things too that are kind of fun. They're talking about the smart refrigerator,
Mhm.
which gives you a lot of advantages, if you want to see at your grocery store and this and that with the camera and all that. But also don't be surprised that if you're buying Hunt's tomato ketchup, that in 2 weeks you might get a coupon
Yeah.
for
Oh,
buying.
tomato, right?
How do they know
Yeah.
that? Well,
Yeah, absolutely. My wife tells me all the time. I was just talking about this, and then it came on my phone. I'm like, yeah, of course it did. That's how it works.
proceed with caution.
Yeah. That's awesome. I can really talk to you forever, but I want to go back to the motivation behind your last book. What was the motivation behind it?
Well, interestingly enough, I've always written for training purposes. I've trained people how to install residential wiring and then put the smart home on top. But I got another book called Residential Wiring in the Smart Home, but it's in the educational market. I've written the fundamentals of solid state electronics, which is used by the unions. I've done one on motor controls. Our motor controls book has been in circulation now for over 25 years and probably 800,000 copies, maybe a little less, maybe a little more, have gone into circulation that trained people for American Tech. It's been the most sold book they've had in 108-year history. But the interesting thing about smart manufacturing, it's very similar to smart home. When you think about it, what happened in the factory was they dropped a computer in the middle.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden everything changed because instead of doing what they call go, no go gauges, you're testing, you're manually, all of a sudden they're putting all these sensors out there to look at the temperature, the sharpness of the blade, this, and this. And then that comes back, it's processed and says, oh, in 2 weeks, you got to sharpen this blade. Well, I was watching that while the new technology was coming about, and Parks Associates does a lot of work with that. So I went to several conferences with Google and all these guys, and they're talking about, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. I'm going, I know what's going to happen. All these little silos are going to start out, and they're going to have all these great ideas, and then you guys are going to come along and buy them up. And so I said, I'm going to start that book now. So by the time they get where they're at, people are going to really want to know what the hell happened.
Yeah.
So I just based it on the technology of sensors, input, process, output. And you look at every device that's smart, there's some kind of input, visual, not visual, but a manual, a voice, a gesture. It processes it and something gets done. The most simple one is your thermostat. It just senses temperature, turns on your furnace.
Yeah.
So that was the motivation behind it. And because I had always been in the educational market, I thought, I want to share this and make a few bucks from the public because I think it'll really go over well.
Yeah.
And it's Christmas, so don't forget to give your mom and dad an opportunity or someone that's very special, the opportunity to tour their smart home.
Very well put. I think, I encourage everyone to buy this. It's a good educational piece. And also it teaching you and adding value to your lives as we, at the same time. So
it's 26 bucks. I mean, it's priced right. It's not overpriced. And there's a Kindle version for $9.95. So
yeah.
anyway.
So, no, that's amazing. I love it. I actually love such books just because it doesn't just give out information, right? It lets you do what it's taught, what the book is talking about.
At the end of each chapter, it asks you, what do you want in your bedroom? What would make your bedroom better? What would make your kitchen better?
Yeah.
Maybe you've seen a lot of these videos and that, then go back, research it, but write it down.
Yeah.
So when you get done, look at the whole house first, decide your priorities. And if you're going to put a system in, make sure there's compatibility. It's really not more difficult than that. And once you understand the basic vocabulary, go out and talk to people, and they're more than willing to give you that information. But let me say also that in addition to smart technology, there's a Living in Place Institute for people that, I don't know if you're familiar with that or not, but they're offering courses for craftsmen, but also I've taken one of their classes. It's good information, and they look at the whole home. These people have done child-proofing courses. They've done things for aging in place. And they look at not only technology, and we're doing some cooperation, but what color do you paint the room? What color is the safety? Where do you put your railings? Yeah. Those kinds of things are really good. The other thing that I've been kind of fun watching is the tunnels to towers for the veterans.
Oh my God, I was actually talking about this with a friend of mine, but go ahead. Yes, please.
Well, I mean, if you get a chance to see some of their commercials, they're showing how they can open and adjust and allow access for people with height situations, with disabilities. Mm-hmm. And by the way, I visited about 4 or 5 years ago Walgreens distribution center, and I think it was the vice president of Walgreens at the time had a child with special needs, and he saw the need. So I think it was like either 10 or 15% of the warehouse employees had to come from that background. And they did some really very interesting things. They had adjustable stands for people who were height challenged. If someone had ADD, they went to the lunchroom because they saw people going, but they didn't know when to come back. So they put a star on the clock that says, this is your lunch is done. In autistic, they did certain things. So it's all you have to do is begin to look at what the person needs, mm-hmm. and then be a little creative in trying to help them reach something that will make their life better and make your surroundings better, because you see that. Absolutely.
Very well put. And as you're doing this, remember, you're not helping the person with a disability only. You're helping everyone. That small modification that you end up doing, that star thing, for example, it can be a standard for everyone, right? Everyone knows now that if the clock hits that star, that it's time to go back, right?
And we also took parents, and the total of 4 relatives of parents from poor health to death. And one of them had Parkinson's, and the other had dementia, another had Alzheimer's. And we began to use technology, particularly in mobility. That's where I found an interest in what you were doing. And there's some really interesting robotics being used within the concept of wheelchair. Mm-hmm. So again, research out there, people are interested, people are trying to find solutions. Yeah. And a lot of them are fairly inexpensive, but really make a dramatic impact.
Absolutely, absolutely. Speaking of wheelchair, my thesis dissertation was actually on the climbing wheelchair with an more innovative design that I actually did the theory and built a functional prototype to it. So and that's one thing I enjoyed in during my master's program, and for the final years of my undergrad, is actually doing the work, right? Not just studying the theory, actually doing the work. But
Parkinson's is particularly devastating because you begin to forget things, eventually forget how to eat, which is the final stages, but you forget how to walk. Yeah. And someone was telling me, well, you put your foot in front and they have to step over it. They understand it. Well, we found a walker with an adjustable laser, and they would be upright and the laser would move, and then they would step over the laser beam.
Yeah,
So like I said, there are some very, very simple
simple things.
concepts
Yeah,
can make a
absolutely.
big difference.
And that's what we're trying to do with our startup, right? We're trying to put out there simple concepts that makes a huge difference. And I actually, I'm gonna offer you this position right now. I'm looking for a strategist, technology strategist, and I would love to collaborate with you when the time is right. Absolutely.
I'll be available.
Yeah. And lastly, what are you working on currently that is keeping Gary Rockis busy?
Well, I have two projects on the forefront. One of them is I'm redoing the motor controls book. We're revamping that to bring in the factory of the future and also to expand our understanding of sensors, because it is so critical now that we can do mass data in 5G and all that and accumulate data. We're trying, I call it data smog, and it's only important when you convert it into knowledge.
Yeah.
The other thing that we're doing is my wife was a grant writer for her career, brought over $70 million into educational systems, including helping me write grants. We're launching a Grants Made Simple program for educators to teach teachers who right now are spending about $750 a month, a year out of their own pocket to furnish their classroom. Wow. And we're going to show them how to write $2,000 and $3,000, $5,000 grants, because Walmart, Panera Bread, Kmart, all of them have local dollars. Mm-hmm. And with a good proposal, they can begin to fund their classroom and bring imagination and innovation back to where it belongs. We're not going to change education. We're going to improve one child's life or one classroom at a time, like when I got my rocket.
Awesome. That's so good. That's so good. Man, I can carry this conversation for hours with you, but this is the end of our time together, and I loved every bit of it. Thank you so much for your time. And how can people get in touch with you? And please give us that information.
Well, it's they can go to my website, Gary Rockis, GaryRockis.com, mm-hmm. And there's information there on how to get a hold of the book and contact us if you want to. And I write for American Technical Publishing. They've been a privately owned publishing company for 108 years, and they have some really fantastic training material. And I'm starting to bring some of their books into the public education area too. So.
Awesome. So thank you so much, Gary, for your time with us.
Well, thank you.
Our show, and this is Mobility and Inclusion. I'm Harut Markarian. I'll see you next time with a different guest.
Thank you.